All right, this is Sports for Real, and I'm going to try this again. I don't know what I got going on here. Make sure I got everything set up before I start talking here. Okay, all right. All right, this is Sports for Real. I did this live the other day, but I'm having technical difficulties, and I'm trying to get everything all ironed out because this is a new way of going live. Normally, when I go live, it's been from the phone, mobile phone, and now I'm switching over to a more centered posture here. And I did this live where I did the introduction of what's taking place in college sports. And I looked at the video and I saw where I was trying to share the screen that it didn't actually go through. So what I'm going to do is a combined video today of what I talked about last time and update it from what's happened since I did that. So let me start out by sharing my screen. And I'm going to make sure that it is sharing, and there it is. This is the prize that everybody is now shooting for in college football. It is a 12-team playoff, which is an 8-team upgrade from before. Before, you couldn't make any errors. You lose a game at the wrong time, you're going to be kicked out. If you're a team that the NCAA really didn't want to have involved in the playoffs, you lost a game, you got kicked out. If you've been winning too much and you lost a game at the wrong time, you got kicked out. Such was the case last year with the defending champion Georgia Bulldogs. Had won the last two championships, trying to get three in a row. And then when they get to the SEC championship game, they get knocked off by Alabama. Now, years past, when a champion or a team that has dominated throughout the season loses that last game, it didn't usually penalize them. But they wanted to see different teams other than the Georgias and the Alabamas all the time. So they couldn't put both teams in there. And with Georgia losing, there was an opportunity to kick Georgia out. Plus, Alabama couldn't afford another loss. And that's the reason why if Georgia had won that game, then yeah, that was fine. But if Alabama beats Georgia, you ran the risk of the SEC not having any teams. So to prevent that, they sent Alabama. As you know, Alabama lost to Michigan, and Michigan went on to win the championship over Washington, who are now in the same conference. That was a great day for the Big Ten. But this year is different. You have 12 teams, and the way it's set up, the first round of the playoffs, you're going to have seeds 5 through 12 go at it. Now, the first four seeds, they're going to get a bye, and those are the highest ranked the top four conference champions based on rank will get those seeds. The fifth conference champion, they're going to get the fifth seed. Now, you still have a little play in not just having the best teams here, because it's going to come down to subjectivity, how people look at the rankings themselves, and the fact that the fifth conference champion could be ranked number 23. If they are ranked number 23, that team sitting on the 12 line thinking they already got it guaranteed to get to the playoffs. If they're not a conference champion, then they're not going to the playoffs. So it's going to cause some problems there. In short, what you have is a setup where no matter what you do, everybody's not going to be happy. So the best way to do it right now is what they have. But having said all of that, I think that it opens up a possibility for who's ever hot at the right time to win the championship. So everybody is depending on certain teams automatically getting to the playoffs and think they're going to win it. No, because the way things are set up now, you're going to have a situation where these teams will start to beat up each other. Case in point, along with this new era of college football, you came up with these conferences loading up with each other. And in this case right here, you see what happened with the Big Ten. They added the four teams from the Pac 12. You have Washington, Oregon, USC, UCLA, and they had to get rid of those two divisions. And because of that, Scheduling became interesting. So the way the Big Ten is doing it, you have guaranteed opponents that you're going to play over a 2 year block. So you maintain some rivalries, but then you're going to start bouncing around. One schedule that stuck out to me was Purdue. They started out yesterday and they beat Indiana State 49-0, which is what they should do. But they got Notre Dame in 2 weeks. And as they go on, the schedule gets increasingly difficult. Nebraska's improving, Wisconsin, Illinois, and then you got Oregon ranked number 3. Then you had 2 weeks later, you got Ohio State and Penn State. That is a rugged schedule for Purdue. And the fact that they have to play this rugged schedule makes it increasingly difficult for them to even have a shot at any kind of run at the playoffs. But if you think that's something, the team with the toughest schedule in the nation has to be the Florida Gators. Find it. And this is the Gator schedule. It started out yesterday with Miami, and it didn't go too well. Then they got Samford, Texas A&M, which is probably a good matchup for them. 2 weeks later, a week later, then you have Mississippi State. Then they get the first of 2 byes, and they get a manageable game against UCF. But then the trouble begins. You got Tennessee. It's always a tough game when they go up to Knoxville, even though the Gators pretty much can handle Tennessee up there. But then Kentucky, that's a back and forth game that can go either way. You get another bye. Then the trouble really begins. You got number 1 ranked Georgia, who is coming to Jacksonville for that annual battle. Then you go to Austin to take on Texas, a team that's threatening to win the SEC and a pick for a lot of people to win the national championship. The week after that, you got LSU. Then you finish with a loaded Ole Miss team led by Lane Kiffin, and finally your rival at Florida State. This has to be the toughest schedule in the nation. I'm saying it's the toughest schedule because nobody has all these rugged opponents back to back. And like I said before, the Gators, they didn't start out so well yesterday. They actually got beat by the Hurricanes on their own field. And a lot of fans aren't too happy about it. They were never happy with Billy Napier in the first place. And now they have a reason for possibly wanting to see getting Napier out of there. This was a scene yesterday. It's like Miami just kept going up and down the field on them and ended up winning the game 41-17. But like I said, this is a new era of college sports with the players getting paid now. People have more expectation. Hey, yeah, you got beat by Miami, but you got to get up off the mat and play. You're making all this money. You got no more excuses. You're a professional now, so get on out there and play. With that rugged schedule, let's just say Florida was able to come out of that schedule and make it to the conference championship. And if they're able to get to the conference championship and get to this playoff here, let me go back to that. Like I say, I don't know. I'm not looking at the stream, so I don't know what's showing and what's not. So I'm going to go in and out of it every time to make sure that the screen is up. So again, going back to the playoff schedule, you see the road that the Gators had to play. If they were to go through that 4-game stretch where they get all those rugged opponents, they would then have to go to the conference championship game. So it comes down to attrition. What kind of shape would the Gators be in if they were able to make it to the playoffs? Let's just say because they're in the SEC and they lose 2 games, they win the conference championship. Even at 3 games, what does that make them? The number 3 seed? They'll get a bye. That would be great. But then you go into another stretch where you're going to play better opponents than you've played already. So the question is, with this new form of scheduling that you have and the ruggedness of the college playoffs, who's going to be left to play when it comes down to playing for a championship? I heard a guy yesterday say that one team that seems to be in prime position is somebody like a Utah. Utah is not in the Pac-12 anymore. They have stepped down a little bit with the Big 12, even though you have a couple of Pac 12 teams in there. But you would think that is an advantage for Utah. Then you got the 7-year quarterback, Cam Rising, if he can stay healthy. Utah certainly is a team that can get into the playoffs, not be as beat up, say, as a Florida would be if they got through that schedule, and then make their way on through the playoff bracket. They can cause problems. So the point I'm trying to make here, with all this conference combining going on, that opens the door for a team with a less strenuous schedule who gets into the playoffs, can make a run because they're going to be playing against teams that are beat up. So the question remains, if these top tier teams make it that far, how many players are they going to have left over to play in the playoffs? So will the NCAA now expand the rosters to accommodate for this kind of situation? I doubt it. So the teams have to play with what they got. So you got to recruit well. But I think because of the schedule, like what you see with Florida, I think what's going to happen is these teams are going to end up going back home and pick up the old type of scheduling that they had before because these fans are used to winning, not losing big. Case in point, Stanford in California chasing the money, they have now joined the ACC. That means they're going to be going cross country an awful lot. Not so much in football, but when it comes down to basketball and the other sports that play a lot more games, you're talking about spending a whole lot of money. And you're at a great disadvantage when you have to travel that far for so long. And I just don't think that it's going to be a model that sustains itself. Plus, you have teams, say like a Florida, you have this arrogant fan base who feel like they should win all the time, and they went lose 2 or 3 games. That's just something they can't deal with. And even to the point where if you go back in time, this is a program that they never would want to believe that they lost 0-11 back in 1979. They forget that. They don't want to talk about that. So if Florida was to continue to get these kind of schedules and get beat up year in, year out with no positivity from it, I don't see the day that they would leave the SEC. But there are programs like a Vanderbilt who may pack up and go somewhere else. What's the perfect landing spot? Well, what about the Pac 12? The Pac 12 lost 10 of its teams because all of them went to go chase the dollar. The only 2 teams that were left was Oregon State and Washington State. Those are 2 places that are kind of hard to get to that nobody really wanted in their conference. But these 2 teams end up smelling like a rose because when those other teams split, they tried to take the money with them, take some of the money with them. But these 2 teams fought that and they won. So all the money that was in the Pac-12 coffers are now controlled by these 2 teams. So if these 2 teams were to make the playoffs, or one of them, all the money is going to be split by them. So you got a big pot of money. You got an agreement with the Mountain West Conference where you got enough games to play where you can generate enough wins to possibly qualify for the playoffs. And you got all the money. So if you take a team like a Florida who's going to get beat up like this, and again, I don't ever see Florida considering leaving, they just might consider going to a place like the Pac-12. They can get all this money, and they don't get beat up as much. And the fan base will be happy because they now will be playing against more teams that they can compete against. Not only a team like a Florida or Vanderbilt may consider the Pac-12, but what about Stanford in California? How long do you think it's going to be before those teams get tired of traveling like that? And if they're not showing any positive gains in it, somebody's going to look up and say, look here, man, this doesn't make sense. We need to go back home. We can go get with Oregon State and Washington State. We should still have a decent relationship with them. And we can go on back and reestablish ourselves. And if there's a need for us to move on beyond that, great. But the thing is, whatever happens with these 2 teams have to happen quick because the conference has a 2-year provision where they can compete under the limit of the normal conference teams, which is either 6 or 8 teams that they have to have. So if Stanford and California come back and then you get three or four defectors from other places, it's not inconceivable to believe that the Pac 12 will rise again. Because what's going to happen, like I said, all those other teams going to end up beating each other up. Florida's got a problem for several reasons. Historically, Florida, they don't play anybody. If they take a chance with a team and they lose, you won't see that for another 4 or 5 years before they take another chance. They went to Arlington to take on Michigan, and they lost that game. And you didn't see them play another team like that, taking a chance until they played Utah over the last 2 years. They beat Utah when they came to the swamp, but they lost to Utah last year. Personally, I think it's great to see the Gators get out on the road and go do something instead of staying around the same little pool that hiding behind the SEC. And I tell you something else, the SEC has made it where you can't really hide anymore, Florida, not only because of the scheduling, but despite the fact that you have to play this rugged conference schedule, they have mandated that you at least play another team from a power conference. That's part of the reason why they're playing Miami again. Because if you recall way back in the 80s, Florida used to handle Miami. But once Miami started winning, capped off by that 31-4, 31-2 or 31-4. They came to Gainesville in '87. That's when Emmitt Smith came off the bench, and he never gave up that job again. That game, when they had AstroTurf, Florida dropped Miami for a more national schedule. Then you start seeing them play teams like Montana State. So when they run across a team like Texas, they haven't played since 1940, I mean, exactly 1 year to the day before Pearl Harbor bombing is the last time that Florida has run across Texas. 84 years. They played Oklahoma in the national championship game when they had Tebow and all them. That's the first time they ever played Oklahoma. Now these two teams are in the conference. Not saying that you can't beat them, but why wouldn't you play these people? It's the same reason why I believe that the fan base will not tolerate 6-6 records every year in Gainesville. They're going to make a move some kind of way. Billy Napier, he's in trouble. He was in trouble before the season started. He has a chance to still win some games. And like I say, they're not dead yet, but the Gators got a problem. And besides the schedule, they're not used to playing away from the South region, and that's going to catch up to them. So until the Gators get their mindset changed, you can talk all you want about going on a redemption tour, but when teams like Miami come in, you should be able to handle Miami. They're good, but they're not great. And you're going to see that unfold as the season plays itself out. So my thing is, with all this heavy conference stuff, the fans won't tolerate that. And those teams that move around like the way they are, they're going to eventually go back home. Now, speaking of people with interests, we want to talk about the Colorado Buffaloes a little bit. The other night, they opened the season with North Dakota State, which was a threat all along to Colorado. Had a great game by Shedeur Sanders, threw for over 400 yards. And then you see this touchdown catch here by Travis Hunter. That was a great catch. Pretty much plucked the ball off the dude's back. And this guy here is a bona fide star. But the fact is that they were in such a close game, it wasn't that Colorado beat North Dakota State. North Dakota State beat themselves. They would make critical errors that they wouldn't normally make when they playing through those FCS playoffs. They were making errors that got them beat. Now, Colorado, I see big issues with Colorado. I don't see a whole lot of improvement from last year. They only ran for like 50 yards on 20 carries. You can't compete in major college football running for 50 yards and expect the quarterback to throw for 400 every time. North Dakota State, they were okay, but they're not going to pose the same kind of threat as, say, Oklahoma State's going to put on Colorado. So they're going to have to make some serious adjustments if they want to get to this college football playoffs. Can they do it? I don't know. But Dion also said that the secondary that he has is going to be hard to beat. It didn't look like that the other night. So I'm going to give him a reprieve because I know that the greatest improvement that any college team or any football team anywhere is going to be made, the improvements are going to be made from week 1 to week 2. So they have a whole week to get themselves together because when they play Nebraska, Nebraska is waiting on them. They pulled away from Nebraska last year, and they got a few plays to go their way, and Nebraska shot themselves in the foot a couple times, and they're quietly building a team over there, and I think they're waiting to see Colorado. So this game against Nebraska next week is going to tell you exactly what you're going to see from Colorado the remainder of the year. Now, speaking of, we'll go back to this real quick. Again, I don't know if I'm actually getting all this stuff broadcast like I want to, but this is the image after the critical call the other night against number 35 from North Dakota State. I saw some reports from some fans who said that they think that the game was rigged, that Colorado was set up to win this game against North Dakota State. Well, I was looking at that game and I didn't get none of that because 35, he was in a chase position, and I think that's Jimmy Horn there. Um, he ran into him. He never looked back for the football, and he made contact with the receiver. That's pass interference all day. So you can gripe all you want, sour grapes or whatever, but that was a clear case of pass interference. And North Dakota State's got nothing to gripe about in that situation. Now, granted, it was never North Dakota State who was complaining. These people talking on the blogs who probably really don't know football and think that this was all set up for Dion. Well, if anything was set up, it'd be a hit list against Dion because he's got this war with the media going on, and if anything, they want to see him fall on his face. I've stated that before, but this particular case right here, and I don't have the best image, but 35, that was a pass interference all day long. It'll be a pass interference next week. It's been a pass interference 30 years ago. So you didn't get any complaints from North Dakota State. That's just the way it goes sometimes. They had a great effort, and they showed you that they're going to be hard to beat. And like I said, Colorado's got a whole lot of things to fix before they go to Lincoln next week. But they have a chance just like everybody else. And the rest of the season is going to be interesting on all fronts. Now, we got the big game tonight, USC and LSU. They haven't played since the late 80s. I think USC went in there and beat them by a couple points one night in Death Valley. So that's the team I like. I like USC. I like USC because they're the kind of team they'll go anywhere and play anybody. Even though I grew up under the shadow of Florida, I didn't see that from Florida. Now, I will say that in 82 and 83, or was it 83, 84, that 3 year span, Florida played USC. They came to Gainesville and they beat them by a touchdown, which was an upset. Charlie Pell was the coach. And then in the rematch, they went to the Coliseum and they tied. It was a 3-3 or 9-9 field goal game. So again, it goes back to my point about Florida. It's not that Florida can't play with these teams, it's just Florida won't schedule these teams. But with the new era of college football, they're going to have to play. But LSU, on the contrary to Florida, Alabama, on the contrary to Florida, and even Georgia, to a lesser extent, these are the teams that will step off the porch and go play you. That's why you have to like a team like LSU because they've been all over the place too. But besides Georgia, not Georgia, but Clemson, they've never been to Clemson, and it was one other team. All the teams that ever won a national championship, USC has been to their home field. Whether they won or not is not the point. It's the fact that they stood in the ring and fought with them. But most of the time they did win because, as you know, USC is one of the preeminent teams in the country. But they're not playing in Death Valley. They're not playing in the Coliseum. They're going to play in Las Vegas. Now, I don't know if that's a 2 year contract or not, but it's great to see those two heavyweights get in the ring and slug it out. What are we going to see? LSU is favored. They're like ranked. What are LSU ranked? 13, and you have USC like 20 something. Nobody's sipping Lincoln Riley's Kool-Aid anymore because as great as he is as an offensive coach, he can't seem to put together a defense. I don't think he cares. As long as he can score some points and say, hey, look at my offense. Look at what we did. He reminds me of Sean Payton. If he can score points, we ain't worried about the defense. Just tackle him, get him to the ground. Maybe we can stay in the game. That's what I think that Lincoln Riley looks at football. But if that man could ever put together a consistent defense with his offense, USC is going to be hard to beat. And they got a tough road to hoe in that new Big Ten. But if you think about it, when USC is USC, who have they beaten for national championships? The best of the Big Ten. And you don't have to play everybody. You're going to play your UCLA's every year, and you might play Ohio State every 3 or 4 years. You might play, I think they got Penn State this year. They got a tough schedule, but this is the kind of schedule USC been playing all along. So of all the teams that are doing all this switching conferences, the less change to affect anybody is USC. Because like I said, there's no team in the country that won a national championship that they hadn't played on that team's home field at some point over the history of college football. None. And I think it's great again that they're going to be taking on LSU, and it's going to be a barn burner, and it's going to be happening tonight. So just to recap of what I talked about today, like I say, I've been having technical difficulties. I don't even know if my streams are getting out. But I started out talking about the playoff bracket. Go on to share again. So I started off talking about the playoff bracket and Florida Gators and the tough schedule that they have. As you can see, they didn't start out too well with Miami, but with the way college football is now, you can lose 2 or 3 games, especially in the SEC, and still make the playoffs. They don't have too many more hiccups if they don't win the conference championship. But after that bye they have in October, you can see how rugged it gets for Florida. Those last 5 games, hey, that's enough for anybody in anyone's season, but that's just the last 5 games. It got nothing to do with the first couple games, and they already lost to Miami. Everybody else is a threat too. So Billy Napier, if he can coach, you got to get to it. Right now, it ain't looking so good. All right, so I see where this thing is. You got to stop and share it all along. So I'm working out these technical difficulties, so stick with me here. But again, the point of all of this, of what I'm talking about today, is the college football playoffs. Again, if you don't know how it works, what you have here is the top 4 seeds, the top 4 conference winners, the highest ranked, they're going to have a bye. And the fifth highest rated champion is going to have to play in the first round against the number 12 seed, but they're going to have that game on their own campus. Win that game, you go to the quarterfinals, and that's when your traditional bowl systems pop in. The semifinals, you're going to be played at the Cotton and Orange Bowl, and then the championship game is going to be played in Atlanta. And just like the NFL, they keep pushing the championship games back farther and farther. They're going back to January 29 now. A couple more years, they're going to push the championship back into February. Just like the NFL, I remember when I was a kid, the Super Bowl was the second week of January. Now they're threatening March, and they keep pushing it back. That's exactly what's going to happen. But if you can get one of these top 4 seeds as a conference champion, then that is a break to get a bye. That will help a team like Florida with the schedule that they have, give them some time to rest up. But the way it looks right now, I don't think Florida is going to get anywhere close to the playoffs, and they're going to have to start over. But one last thing about Florida, and I already covered this, the 2 teams that we're talking about. I told you before that I think Deion, I've been saying this for years now, that he's only doing this for his sons. Took him to Jackson State, got him out of Jackson State, take him to a high level so they can get a look at better competition. Now he's at Colorado. After this year, both his sons are gone, and his adopted son, per se, not really adopted, but you look at him like his son, Travis Hunter, all 3 of those guys are going to be gone. So I thought that Deion was going to give it up after that. But now I'm hearing rumors that the Gators are contemplating bringing in Sanders to be their next coach. I hear they already been talking to Sanders about it. I don't believe it. because I understand the history about the University of Florida over here. Um, if Florida State didn't want to bring him in, and he's one of them, I can't see how Florida would want to bring in Dion. Uh, in a way, it would make sense because now you don't have that make sure my son is okay kind of thing going on, like what I think is going on out there in Colorado. Um, then it comes down to getting the best talent. You're going to get the good talent anyway because you're a Gator in the SEC. But Dion will get you some good recruits. He took Travis Hunter. You can get other guys that can be highly rated and come in there and turn that program around. His whole thing is getting transfers and building it that way. Because if you think about it, what makes better sense? You're going to recruit a guy in high school that's never played college, or you're going to get a guy who's had success on the NCAA level and get him. So it's recruiting all over, but it's on a higher level. So I think the best way to go is to get a recruit from somebody who's already got experience. That's the problem that Dabo Swinney has. He can't adjust to the modern times. Now, I kind of agree with Dabo in a lot of ways. As a teacher, as a coach, I want to develop the talent that I have and win with that. But even in high schools now, with players having the ability to pack up and move around based on some whim, it's basically rendered spring practice inevitable. Not inevitable, but irrelevant in high school. Because you can have a team that you practice with all spring, and then in the summer they go in here and they go in there. So now you left with a shell of a team. That happened to me before they started moving around, illegally moving around. Injuries and grades and everything else cut my throat. That's before they start moving around. So how can you build a team in the spring when you don't know if this team is coming back or not? Same thing in college. You go to the transfer portal, you sign them, make sure they got a good NIL package, and you go from there. If Dion's not good at anything else, he can't get players to come to Colorado. And if he can get them to come to Colorado, he can get them to come to Gainesville. So if you think about it, it would make some sense. But the problem with going to Florida as Dion, he will have a very, 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 very short hook. And I don't even want to get into why. But if you have any idea about the concept of America and how it works, then you can understand what I'm saying. Because Florida, they don't have the same aura as, say, a Mississippi or Alabama. But I'll tell you this, it ain't much different. And with that, I catch you guys on the other side. This has been Sports for Real. All right. I need